episode number 021 of Something Else with Arya and not KJ. I am Arya, joined as always by myself. And today we're going to dive back into Mid South Wrestling. We're going back in time to February 11th, 1982. Plus, we're going to have a special TNA edition of This Match Really Happened, along with Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. And of course, after all that, I do have to start the show by pointing out that yes, we are the iPhone 13 of pro wrestling podcasts. What do I mean by that? Well, last week we had that episode where we recapped Vince McMahon's hostile retakeover and Stephanie McMahon quitting, which I recorded, I believe it was around 7 or 8 o'clock Eastern time last Tuesday. And about an hour after I posted it was when the stories of WWE being sold to Saudi Arabia came out. So yes, the one time I tried to do a recent news story and get the jump on everything, I literally got, you know, I was literally considered obsolete an hour after I came out. Much like when you go out and buy a brand new iPhone 13 and you got the little, you know, in your step and you're like, that's right, I got the newest phone out there. And then they immediately come out with the iPhone 14. And so you're already one behind already. But that's, I guess, why we need to stick to old school wrestling and why we stick to 1982, February 11th, 1982, to be specific, for this episode of Mid South Wrestling. And in case you've been curious, whatever happened to KJ, at the end of the day, he was not a fan of a lot of stuff. He didn't enjoy the podcasting as much as I figured he would. He didn't like this old school wrestling as much as I do. It, you know, he has an open invite to come back anytime he liked and talk about anything he would like. But for now, it's just me, all on this show. And we're going to have some guests coming up. But by and large, it's just me. If you or anybody you know would like to be a host of a wrestling podcast and have an opinion, give me a call and we'll figure something out. But by the way, whatever site or service you're listening to this on, we're available on a whole boatload of different places. The key one being tinyurl.com/something else pod. You can also hear us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, and Radio Public. As I always point out, yes, these are all real places that you can listen to us. They don't sound real, some of them, believe me, but they are all real. They all exist, and you can find us on each and every one of them completely ad free, unless those particular places are just dropping ads in and not paying me for them. Hopefully, they're not doing that, or at least sending me a check soon. But let's get started here. We are at the Irishman Gale Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now, Boyd Pierce is hosting this week's show, and I was under the belief that Skandar Akbar was going to be his guest commentator, but Skandar's just out here for the first 10 minutes to recap everything that happened on last week's show. And there might be a few head scratching right here because it was like 3 months ago when we talked about it. So, to remind you of what happened, Ernie Ladd used to manage the Samoans. And last week on the program, he was cutting a promo with Boyd Pierce when Bill Watts asked him why is Skandar Akbar in the ring with the Samoans. And the Samoans turned on Ernie Ladd and are now under the tutelage of Skandar Akbar. And as a matter of fact, they were joined in by a new giant who would eventually become known as the One Man Gang, but they don't have a name for him yet. And actually, I don't know why I keep talking because we're going to kick things off with some audio. It's the introduction of the show, and they're going to be talking about what happened last week. And we'll be back after that because they go to a couple videos and come back, etc. But we'll get to that here in a minute.
Wrestling Television Network. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, and we have another outstanding card. Brian Blair in the ring against Paul Orndorff. The Louisiana Heavyweight Championship on the line as the Junkyard Dog defends his coveted title against the former holder, Bob Arup. You'll see Ted DiBiase and Mr. Olympia join forces in tag team action, and Alpha and Sika, the new Mid-South Tag Team Champions, and they're managed by the controversial new manager, General Skandar Akbar, and to me, after last week, it looks like he's taken over the management of a tag team like the Samoan Warriors Alpha and Sika, like the old-time gangsters in Chicago took over by eliminating the present managers.
Boyd Pierce, I was invited at this desk for my views and comments not to be insulted. I am not a gangster. I am General Skandar Akbar. I consider myself one of the all-time greats of professional wrestling.
All right,
I know that Ernie Ladd was directly responsible for the disappearance of the Iron Sheik from the Mid-South area.
Let's go back then to last week, whenever we saw what happened when Ernie Ladd interrupted Bill Watts and myself here at the television table. Let's watch it right now.
And we're not going to do that here. If you want to listen to that, I think it was episode number 015 that covered that particular week's show. Go back into the archive and take a listen to it. But yeah, they re-showed everything that we had, everything that we just talked about, where Ernie Ladd lost control of the Samoans. They turned on him. They splashed him in the leg, injuring his leg that has been injured earlier. But and we had the debut of the man who turned out to be the one-man gang. The one thing also that they did that I didn't mention was that they did wrap up the whole Iron Sheik situation, where the last time we saw Sheik, he was feuding with Paul Ellering, and then he just disappeared. And they tied it up there, saying that somehow Ernie Ladd had something to do with it, which I guess will give them time to figure out what may have actually happened. But if you recall, the storyline was that he had been called back by the Shah of Iran to Iran. And, you know, I think in reality, he went to Florida at that point. But, yep, that's that. So after the video, we go back to the desk with Skandar Akbar and Boyd Pierce.
For last week right here on Mid-South Wrestling Television, you yourself refused to name the name of that huge ruffian that burst upon the scene and brought all the damage. I'm wondering if you'll tell us right now who this man is.
No way. It's none of your business, none of Mid-South's business, until I am completely ready to disclose his identity.
Okay.
I can tell you one thing, Boyd. I'll interrupt one time. This man is a one-man wrecking crew, 6'6" and 455 pounds.
You won't tell us who he is, so I'm going to tell it that you and your Samoans have the Mid-South title around your grasp and around their waist. But I'm going to tell you, and the fans know just exactly what I'm talking about, because we tell it like it is. In my heart, I have to know and realize that you operate on a low level, and that's the only reason that you were able to gain a victory. It looks like you'll do it at any cost, and we're going to show what happened right now.
And so next they show the finish of the tag team title match, where Junkyard Dog and Mike George defended the belts against the Samoans. And one thing led to another, including Skandar using fire at one point, which got blocked by a chair, which I bet you didn't know you could do. But, and either way, the Samoans picked the win, got the title, and we came back to the desk after we saw that footage again to basically put a neat little bow on everything that we've seen so far.
The general sees his objective. He goes after it. And I can say now that the general's army is intact. The great Samoan warriors. And let's not forget the one-man wrecking crew. 6'6", 455 pounds. And you'll be hearing a lot from the general and his army in Mid-South. When somebody comes into your backyard and steals, you retaliate. And that's exactly what I did.
You still won't tell us who it is, but I'm going to tell you that fire, chairs, and injuries. Last week, in a span of just a few moments, we saw Ernie Ladd and Mike George both injured, unable to wrestle and make a living to support their families. And I guess, General Skandar Akbar, inside your heart, it makes you really proud.
Very, very proud. As I've said before, and I do not like to repeat myself, Boyd Pierce, when a general sees his objective, he goes after it. And the Army now is intact, believe me.
We won't ask you to repeat that, but we'll be back with live action after this word from Mid-South Wrestling Television Network.
So that took up the first 10 minutes of the show. And to be fair, from there, I mean, you typically get in one angle per show. That was the only angle we got the entire show, and it wasn't even a new angle. It was a recap of last week's angle. And so the rest of the show, by and large, mostly straightforward wrestling here. And we'll just go through everything here. It's not the most super exciting show because let's be honest, the TV shows were never meant to be, 5-star wrestling matches. But, you had some good action. You had some fun matches. First one up was the Samoans, the Mid-South Tag Team Champions, against Bill Ash and Rick Ferrara. This is when I realized that Akbar was not the guest commentator. Instead, it was going to be 1 full hour of Boyd Pierce on the microphone by himself. Which, it could be better. We'll say that here. I'm always amazed that the Samoans are these two savages who don't have basic language skills, at least enough to communicate at all without a manager or a handler to lead them around. However, they do fully understand the referee's instructions and, the basic rules of tag team wrestling. They may violate the rules nonstop, but they're aware that one person needs to stand on the apron, wait for the tag. They're aware they need to come up with their own double team moves and whatnot. And they're aware that, when you beat the tougher opponents, the bigger name opponents, you make more money, you have the chance to win championship belts. These are things they understand despite not even having a basic rudimentary understanding of the English language or apparently any language. Anyway, Ferrara got the hot tag here and almost immediately was hit with a Samoan drop for the pin. Paul Orndorff versus Brian Blair. Our favorite audience member, who we named Larry Dallas, is the gentleman in the front row with a cowboy hat on. He appeared to be sleeping during this match. And this guy's not known for, giant acts of, excitement during these matches. But I'm pretty sure he was asleep during a Brian Blair headlock. The story of this match was both men are from Tampa and grew up together and were friends, but Orndorff has turned his back on all of his Tampa area friends. At one point, they got a little wonky. Blair went to throw Orndorff into the corner, but Paul somehow sidestepped the corner and went into the ropes, and so Blair bullied him into the corner. Blair then tried to clothesline Orndorff out of the ring, and that took longer than it really should have. Both men tumbled to the outside, where somehow Blair got the worst of it, as Orndorff got into the ring first. And then Orndorff hit that move that, I always like this move. You don't see it too often. He gets on the middle rope. He puts his knee against Blair, and then they both fall backwards, or Blair falls backwards and Orndorff falls forwards. And that was the finish. Picked up the pin there. Good match, Again, there's nothing wrong with a lot of these matches. Well, until Ed Wiskowski comes out in a little bit. But, there's nothing terribly wrong. Sometimes they're not the most exciting, matches in the world. Sometimes you're just waiting for the finish because there's something bigger coming. But, these aren't full of botches. You're not going to see a lot of Mid-South on Botchamania. Junkyard Dog is out next to defend the Louisiana title against Bob Roop. This is the third title match in 3 weeks. And the first 2 weeks, we had the Mississippi State title change hands. We had the tag team title change hands. Will the Louisiana title be next? Will we go 3 for 3? Dog stormed the ring and was quite angry about losing the tag titles last week. And Roop is just standing there like, dude, I had nothing to do with that. Why are you angry at me? Larry, our friend at the ringside, actually took off his cowboy hat which at first made me think he wasn't even there, but he was. He just took off his hat for some reason. Roop locked on a full Nelson and slammed Dog's head into the corner, which never quite works. I'm going to play what Boyd Pierce said about how Dog got out of this, and I'll come back afterwards and tell you about it.
There, we showed you the unorthodox style. It's not how you do it, it's what you do in professional wrestling. Whether it looks like a storybook or the way it should be done, the Junkyard Dog does it his own inimitable style. There you see him going with that headbutt that clips Bob Roop.
Junkyard Dog with his amazing style that he and he alone, would think of doing. What he basically did was he powered out of the full Nelson and then flipped him over. It really wasn't that big of a deal. I doubt it was that big of a deal back in 1982, but here we are. So Roop went to the apron. So Junkyard Dog punched him, and somehow Roop got his leg caught in the ropes and he fell backwards to the ground. And that's how we went to commercial. However, they always say, oh, keep the cameras rolling in case something happens during the commercial break. And, nothing ever happens in the commercial break. Well, coming back from a commercial break, let's go to Boyd Pierce.
Now, wrestling fans, what happened while we were on a commercial break? We're going to show you because, like we told you when we went away, we kept the cameras rolling in case there was a victory or decision, and we had one when we left. The challenger, Bob Roop, was entwined with his leg between the second and bottom strand of the rope. So let's watch right now. We recorded it for you. I kept right on doing the commentary, and you'll be able to see it right now, even though it happened while we were on a commercial break. Let's watch it.
Boyd explains to us how instant replay works. But anyway, Roop is on the ground holding his leg. Paul Orndorff comes out, and, he's there and helps Roop get out of the ropes. Roop and Orndorff are begging for a timeout, but that dang referee just won't give it to them. Back into the ring, we had a miscommunication spot. Orndorff tried to hit the Dog, but Dog ducked, so he hit Roop. JYD then threw Paul Orndorff on top of Roop, and then Orndorff rolled to the outside. Bob Orton Jr. ran out to interfere. Dog picked him off the top rope, press slammed him over the top rope to the outside on top of Orndorff, and then JYD pins Bob Roop with a punch to the face. And Boyd explains how we've had 2 straight title changes the last couple of weeks, but JYD was able to stop the streak, and we did not have a new Louisiana champion here today. So we go to the standby matches. Ted DiBiase and Mr. Olympia are in action up next, teaming against Bob Orton Jr. and Ed Wiskowski, the Polish Prince. I take 3 months off and fully expected the timeline to shift ahead 3 months, but for some reason, the timeline didn't shift. Ed Wiskowski is still here. Larry Dallas, our good friend, is at ringside and he put his hat back on. And if you recall, the last time we were reviewing Mid-South regularly, I thought Orton was being written out of the territory or booked out of the territory because at one point, he lost his title. They did a match at one point where he wasn't even in the match, but somehow he got pinned and lost the match. So I'm like, oh, they're obviously, getting rid of him at this point. But nope, he's still here. They got the heat on DiBiase, and of course, Orton is the one who screwed up. Yeah, and Ted almost got a hot tag, but the referee did not see it. And the finish ended up seeing Wiskowski go for a suplex on DiBiase, but Olympia came up the top rope with a drop kick to Ted, which then somehow led to Wiskowski, losing the advantage, and Ted falling on top of him. All 4 men are in the ring at this point. Olympia puts Ed Wiskowski out with a sleeper hold, and Ted made the pin, which apparently counted, and Ted DiBiase and Mr. Olympia pick up the win. There are 3 minutes left in the show, and we could get a nice little recap of everything we've seen. And, being told, hey, this is what's on the show next week. Nope. We have our weekly expiration of time match, Ron Cheatham versus Frank Monty, made even funnier by the fact that Boyd says that we have another standby match in case this match ends with enough time. Yes, 3 minutes left in the show, and we're being promised that, hey, if this match comes to an end, we're gonna have another match. Don't worry, don't think about tuning out because you think we're gonna be talking for 10 seconds. This isn't that worldwide episode where Dusty Rhodes talked for the last 9 minutes of the show. This here is Mid South Wrestling, and we cram as much wrestling as we can into 41 minutes and 32 seconds. Honestly, not a whole lot to talk about here. It's your standard expiration of time match. We did have Boyd running down the card for next week. So let's give it a listen.
Next week here on Mid-South Wrestling, Dick Murdoch, the Fabulous Texan, will be back, and also returning the American Dream, the Living Stardust, Dusty Rhodes. So all the top stars coming to the Mid-South area. We invite you to be with us every week, and whenever it's in your area, 2 minutes. We get to 2-minute signal now as the clock on the wall is moving. Whenever Mid-South Wrestling is in your area, make your plans to go see the world's most exciting professional sport. Man against man for supremacy inside the squared circle. You'll never be disappointed, and all the top stars are here.
You will never be disappointed. Like next week, we're going to have the fabulous Texan, Dick Murdoch. This man has never been called the Fabulous Texan ever. I will bet my left arm. And I mean, no, that's my bad arm, but I mean, I don't want to lose my right arm. But, Dick Murdoch, the Fabulous Texan, will be here along with the Living Stardust himself, Dusty Rhodes. And this is why you should go to the Mid-South Wrestling house shows, because they have the big stars. They have Dusty Rhodes, they have Dickie Murdoch, baby. And they're both going to be here on TV next week. At this point, the match, it's your standard expiration of time match. The match is so exciting that Boyd just starts talking about who all the champions are Mid-South. And at this point, if you've ever watched Mid-South or even just a match or two, like you'll notice all the stands in the background of the Irish McGill Boys Club. These stands were empty at this point. They really need to do more to convince people to stay till the end of the tapings, because it looked like there were like 20 people left in these stands at this point. It's not like you started with 10,000, but there was not a whole lot left. The stands are completely empty. The match ends in a time limit draw, shockingly, right? And so this show honestly was one of those episodes that you could have skipped. And, not a whole lot happened. There wasn't really any storyline advancement. We had our Bob Roop loses a match again, like he does, every week, it seems. And I mean, that was that. And, here we are. And so every week we've been giving this show a rating. And, we rated out of 1 to 10 Ed Wiskowskis, where somehow the more Ed Wiskowskis you get, the better it is, which does definitely seem like it definitely seems backwards, if you ask me. But I had to give this 5.5 Ed Wiskowskis. Like I said, the matches themselves were fine. It was good to go over everything that happened last week, because last week there was a lot of stuff that happened. But it's kind of like at this point, man, we could have gone a bit more, or something a bit more exciting than this. By the way, this show was taped on February 3rd, 1982, same night as last week's show. And I mean, that's what they usually do. They do the two tapings of 1 week. Let me see what the house shows were that weekend or that week. Actually, we don't. This show aired February 11th. They don't have another show until the next TV taping, but the most recent house show was on February 7th at the Lake Charles Civic Center in Lake Charles, Louisiana. We had Jerry Novak defeating Rick Ferrara, Bill Ash defeating Frank Monte, Brian Blair defeating my good friend Ed Wiskowski, Mr. Olympia beating Bob Orton, Ted DiBiase beating Bob Roop in a North American title match, and in the main event for the tag team titles, the Wild Samoans defeated the Junkyard Dog and Brian Blair. And I'll give you two guesses who did the job in that match, and you really don't need both guesses if you know anything about Mid South. Okay. So, of course, because I actually enjoy Mid South and, you know, I don't mind the slower pace, with the angles. Because, I started watching wrestling in 1991. At the time, you were lucky to get an angle a week, unless they were building to a big show like it was WrestleMania. And even then, they tried not to do more than one angle a week. But, KJ started watching. Remember when Baron Corbin poured dog food on Roman Reigns? That was when KJ started watching wrestling. Yeah, and somehow he's still watching. So my point is, KJ's used to watching these shows where you have 2 or 3 hours of, whether or not the results are predictable, you have 2 to 3 hours every week of competitive wrestling matches between stars, and you have multiple angles on every show, and there's never really any slow points where they try to make it as exciting as possible for the entire show. Whereas you take, one of these Mid-South shows where, they do the big angle and then they slow it down so that there is some wrestling there so you can enjoy it, but they also, slow it down so they can go over and over again what you just watched, what's the significance of the angles that we just saw. And, well, we don't see them now because most of these shows are on the network, tell you, hey, if you go to this house show, if you go to this event, that angle you just saw, you're going to watch these people wrestle on this live event and encouraging you to go spend your money. Like, I have no idea what's going on in Raw right now, probably knowing my luck, I don't know. There's a giant AEW invasion of WWE right now while I'm doing this podcast talking about nothing. Uh, that's just, the way things work for me. Actually, let's see. It's 8:23 on Monday, January 16th. Let's see what's going on Raw. Let's see. Uso, Solo Sikoa, Judgment Day, Big Brawl. Muhammad Ali is Muhammad Ali. Wow. Mustafa Ali is wrestling Solo Sikoa. I'm confident that, you know, this show won't be upstaged by big breaking news here in an hour. Fingers crossed. All right, so we then go, well, we're still in the Wayback Machine, but we're a lot closer than, 1982. We're going to go to a match from Destination X 2008, the TNA pay-per-view, Norfolk, Virginia, and it's a one-on-one match between James Storm and Rhino. And I know what you're going to say here. If I just tell you, hey, James Storm's wrestling Rhino, you're like, hey, I bet that's a pretty good match. It's not AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels in their prime, having a 30-minute singles match. But, you have two really good brawlers. I bet they found a good way to, have a nice, exciting match, show Norfolk, Virginia what TNA is all about. And, a nice prep here from the news. This was the semi-main event of the show. The main event had, Samoa Joe and AJ Styles and Kurt Angle and Christian in it. And it's like, yeah, it's like this seems like it's going to be really good. And, why on earth am I making a big deal about talking about this match between two people who were in TNA for years? And obviously they had to cross paths at some point. Well, this was Elevation X, which, if you forget what Elevation X is, it was TNA's answer to the scaffold match. The match that no one ever needed, no one ever asked for, but TNA gave it to you anyway. It was Rhino and James Storm, two guys who are, 260, 270, neither of whom are, X Division standout athletes with great balance and, exciting moves. and we're going to put them on a scaffold 15 feet above the air, give or take. And yeah, this was the second time they did one of these, and the first time was Rhino and AJ Styles in the impact zone, um, where you have AJ Styles, a daredevil who, you know, took a bit more, took a few risks, wasn't afraid to bump on that thing and put on more of a show. Wasn't Bobby, but it wasn't PN News either. And on top of this, and what helped kill this match too, was that this match, like we said, was in the Norfolk scope. And the 2007 match was in the Impact Zone, which has a much lower roof. And thus, they were like the scaffold was lower in 2007 than it was in 2008. And B, because the roof was so much higher in Norfolk, they had to use a lot more chain to hold it up. It made the scaffold more rickety and harder for either of them to really do anything on. And so, yeah, this definitely was a showcase of what TNA was at the time. And it's sad that they wasted all of this talent. Um, so yeah. So they came out. Storm came out first. He was had Jacqueline in his corner as manager. He climbed up and he couldn't even stand. So he crawled on his hands and knees and brought a 6-pack of beer into the middle of the scaffold. Rhino came down and climbed up. He slipped and almost fell off halfway up, but Rhino climbed down, or Storm climbed down. The bell rang with neither man technically on the scaffold. Rhino was going up, Storm was going down, and the bell rang. Storm pretty much said F this and went to walk out. Rhino got to the middle of the scaffold and began throwing the cans of beer at James Storm. Rhino did actually walk across and he climbed down to meet Storm on the ground. 3 minutes in, they start brawling on the ground with each other. Rhino pulls out a couple of tables and sets them up in the ring. He put one propped up in the corner, which never came into play. And Storm set up the second table, which shockingly was directly under where someone would fall from the scaffold. I wonder if that was letting you know what's going to happen ahead of time. So Rhino goes for the gore inside the ring, but Jackie jumps on Rhino's back and then slapped him. And so to get away from Rhino, Jackie climbed the scaffold, and Rhino, of course, followed her up. She crawled all the way across and went down the other side, and Storm followed up. So 7 minutes into the match, both are on the scaffold. Storm crawled back and forth, and Rhino at one point straddled the scaffold and basically beckoned Storm to come. And if Storm wasn't really scared to be up there, he is an amazing actor because that boy just he was not having this. It's like you never saw someone move so slowly to get to the thing. And by the way, if you put me up there, I would have been so much worse than this. But I'm not a professional wrestler. I'm not getting paid to go up on a scaffold. James Storm was for some reason. Because that was the best use for James Storm, I guess, was to do a scaffold match. Finally, this match builds to the most magical 4 seconds of the match. It was the only 4 seconds where both men were standing up at the exact same time. And in that 4 seconds, Rhino threw a punch, Storm blocked it, and threw a punch of his own, and they both immediately jumped to their stomachs and never stood up again. Now, you might be wondering what else they did while, they're up on the scaffold, sliding across, on their butts or on their stomachs. They threw a couple punches each. That was pretty much it. Storm at one point managed to climb into the structure because what they did is basically I don't know if it's the Elevation X. It was like the light structures they used to do the elevation or to do the Ultimate X match, and then they used similar structures, basically the lighting rigs, making an X, and they had like red boards on top of it. So Storm slid underneath the red boards where he was inside, the lighting rigs there. By the way, there was an Ultimate X match one time where they had like 10 guys in it, and that was what they used instead of ropes because they wouldn't be able to get 10 people on the ropes. Um, so if you ever saw that Ultimate X, that's what they used. And so anyway, Storm is hiding in there, and it was supposed to build to, well now, oh yeah, because Storm spat beer into Rhino's eyes. So it's supposed to build to this big spot where Rhino's going to get the fans into this by asking where James Storm is. And the people just didn't care about that either. Eventually, Rhino rips up the boards that were covering Storm. He punches him a few times. He pushes down on his stomach a few times. And finally, Storm drops through the conveniently placed table that he had the foresight to put there. The match somehow goes 13 minutes and 14 seconds. 13 minutes and 14 seconds. And of that entire time, 4 seconds, they both were standing up on the scaffold. This was what TNA gave the fans of Norfolk, and this during one of the few times that they did a pay-per-view outside of Orlando. This is what they gave the people. Alrighty. So let's move away from wrestling and go to what sometimes is my favorite segment of the week. It's Weird News of the Week. That's right, folks. It's Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. Nobody, the company that sponsors nothing. And we're going to go to our favorite website for weird news. It is upi.com. We have another story by Ben Hooper. Loose cow visits Olive Garden restaurant in Oklahoma. That's right. Loose cow visits Olive Garden restaurant in Oklahoma. Police in Oklahoma put their cowboy skills to the test when a loose cow was spotted wandering outside an Olive Garden restaurant. The Stillwater Police Department said officers responded alongside Stillwater Animal Welfare when a loose cow was spotted Thursday near the Olive Garden in Stillwater. Officers questioned the cow and learned that the cow had heard about the never-ending soup and salad option at Olive Garden and decided to see for itself. Police joked in a Facebook post. I gotta see if they actually said that. The cow was safely corralled and relocated from the area. The animal's origins were unclear. Any farmers out there in Stillwater missing a cow? And yeah, Stillwater Police Department, January 12th at 12:02 p.m. They say let me see here. We highly recommend the steak at Texas Roadhouse. We highly recommended the steak at Texas Roadhouse, but the cow declined. They're full of jokes. No animals were harmed. It's just a joke. But news story is real, but they just told, horrible jokes about it along the way. Oh boy. I'm trying to read some of the comments here, see if there's anything actually funny. Nope, there wasn't. But good news, the cow was just fine. And here we are. So there's that, So that's gonna do it for this week's show. We had a good time, we had some laughs, we talked about some wrestling, and as you can see, we've been doing these shows Wednesdays. Last week we did a Tuesday. Today I'm doing it on Monday. I don't seem to have a specific date yet planned out. It's kind of pretty much once a week whenever the heck I feel like doing it. I do plan on doing the post show for the Royal Rumble that night. I think that's in 2 weeks. So we'll be back next week with a regular show, probably on Monday or Tuesday. Keep an eye out on your favorite places that you go to listen to wrestling podcasts. Also, whatever site you use to listen to us on, please consider subscribing and giving us a 5-star review. Those 5-star reviews help out with the algorithm and help bring us up and show us as a suggested podcast for other people to listen to. At the end of the day, there's a lot worse things you'd be listening to than me for an hour. And hey, occasionally you learn something. Occasionally you have some fun listening to us. But, thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you again next week.